For each season of House of the Dragon, I'll probably do an updated episode ranking. I think it'll be fun to see how each season compares and to do a retrospective view of prior seasons. With that out of the way, let's jump into the bottom of the list. Season 1, Episode 5, We Light the Way. I know the hate for Season 2 is still hot and furious, but I still deeply dislike this episode from how terrible the ending is. Like all the lords and ladies suddenly turning into maniacs, attacking each other in a spontaneous mosh pit, Criston Cole striking the future king consort and nothing coming of that, and then obviously the biggest point of Criston blatantly killing Joffrey in front of dozens of witnesses. To say that this scene is jarring would be an understatement, and the fact that we never see any kind of investigation into this makes it feel like there's a massive gaping hole in the narrative. I can buy the fact that Alicent can bail Criston out of this situation, but we actually need to see that. This whole scene also takes up 20 minutes of screen time, and the fact that the payoff is so bad really hurts the overall episode. I also can't say there are enough good scenes to carry this episode out of the gutter the ending threw it into. The two decent scenes are Otto warning Alicent, and Rhaenys' dialogue with Corlys. Besides those, Daemon killing his wife felt convenient and rushed. There's your typical development scenes. Criston's delivery here still makes me chuckle.
So you want me to be your whore?
And Viserys does have a nice warm moment with Lionel. However, there's nothing great about this episode to repair what happens in the end. Season 1, Episode 9, The Green Council. I'd put this over We Light the Way predominantly because the plot is a bit more exciting. However, it still falls into the same pitfall of the ending being absolutely bananas. Rhaenys bursting through the floor of the dragon pit feels like such a forced way to instill more shock value into the episode. Like, why can't you just go out the exit they showed in the first episode? And even if that's closed, then surely it'd be easier to break through that instead of the floor of the dragon pit. But this is also completely ignoring the fact that no one was even guarding the entrances to where they keep the dragons. Rhaenys just walks right in to get melees back. So you'd think there would be a bit of security in terms of protecting your nuclear arsenal. Then the point of her sparing the greens I can buy, but I think the writers could have made this make more sense if Alicent was the one to let Rhaenys go, under the hope that she'll try to convince Rhaenyra to accept peace offerings. And therefore, that's why Rhaenys spares Alicent. Instead, her reasoning is that she doesn't want to commit kinslaying, and she's technically neutral at this point, even though all of her grandkids are on Rhaenyra's side. So this can also be seen as a bit contradictory because Rhaenys is a big advocator for no dragon warfare, and this could have been an easy way to subvert that inevitability. So yeah, this has aged even worse in my opinion. Then, besides this terrible ending, the opening Green Council scene is good, but it can be better and more extensive. It feels kind of underwhelming how fast Beesbury dies because he was the main point of opposition. I know that if they killed him in a more bombastic way, then Alicent probably would have gone over the edge. There's also another point here that's a bit confounding because they let Harold Westerling go, despite them not wanting anyone to leave and potentially alert Rhaenyra about Viserys' passing. Especially since he was her protector at one point and clearly was loyal to Viserys' wishes. Then the dual plot of Otto and Alicent hunting down Aegon is a bit convoluted because they essentially have the same goal. Alicent just wants more bargaining power over Otto and having him not try to kill Rhaenyra, but I don't know how he's really going to do that, especially since this information will leak at some point, and Rhaenyra will probably hear about Aegon being crowned king before assassins get to her or whatever. Also, the whole Eric and Eric development is overly confusing because on top of being twins and having audibly the same name, they're also wearing the same fucking wardrobe. So distinguishing between them is practically impossible and essentially nukes any development they receive, which is pretty unfortunate given how great their duel was in Season 2. Season 2, Episode 5, Regent. This may be an unpopular opinion, but I think this is the worst episode of Season 2, purely because nothing is enticing about it, unfortunately. Episodes 3 and 8 have extremely flawed scenes with bad writing, and while I may feel compelled to put them around here, they do at least have great scenes that carry each episode. Unlike Regent, which is just a bunch of setup and development, some of which could have honestly happened off-screen in retrospect. There's not much of a major draw to this episode, and all the dialogue scenes are rather forgettable. The only two scenes that are good are the Green Council as always, and Rhaenyra's ending revelation with Jace. Other than that, Harrenhal this episode is at its slowest for the entire season, which is excruciating. The ending ratchets up the pace and then builds to nothing. Rhaenyra has a scene with Baela that gave me amnesia because I forgot it even happened, and Corlys was criminally underused. In general, I feel like I was a little soft on this episode when initially reviewing it, and now that I'm retrospectively looking back on it, there's nothing that draws me to this episode, and I'd be the most compelled to fast forward through it. Season 2, Episode 3, The Burning Mill. I came pretty close to declaring this as the worst episode of Season 2, but I think Daemon and Harrenhal single-handedly redeems the Burning Mill from being the worst. That scene is so engrossing from how tense and horrifying the environment is. The sound design aids the horror, and the way it's shot and is paced is amazing. Honestly, I feel like this could be a contender for one of the best scenes in the season. Then him meeting Simon Strong is a fun little dialogue scene, and the introduction of magic is very intriguing. So, the obvious reason why this episode is down here is the ending plot point of Rhaenyra going to King's Landing. I went in depth analyzing all the flaws within this scene for my season review, but to reiterate briefly, it's extremely contrived, forces the narrative into a specific direction that doesn't make sense. Rhaenyra's intellect is compromised from not considering certain major aspects, one of them being Alicent can't stop the war. And this plot point is so silly and outrageous that it simply feels out of place in House of the Dragon. Besides all of these massive glaring flaws, at the very least the acting and dialogue between Rhaenyra and Alicent is great. It's just unfortunate how terribly the writers had to compromise the quality of the show to get them here. Other than this, there are a collection of good scenes that act as support for the Burning Mill, like the Green Council discussion, the Moon Dancer ambush, Larys manipulating Aegon, and Rhaena having to accept her duties. Although, the whole brothel and Aegon out drinking is another shot to the foot, especially since that takes up 5.5 minutes. Season 2, Episode 8, The Queen Who Ever Was. Honestly, this would be a good episode if it wasn't a finale, and we cut out that abruptly slapped on ending montage, because most of the scenes within this episode are actually great. We have raw and captivating dialogue scenes, characters gaining so much complexity that it drastically increases their intrigue, character arcs that feel so well deserved and deeply change the characters at hand, and some extremely cathartic payoff that has been building for the entire season. However, this is a finale, and I feel like this episode has more responsibility on its shoulders to end on a much bigger plot point and to have a better resolution. Instead of the climactic explosion being an inconsequential dialogue scene between Rhaenyra and Alicent. The writers also try to energize the scene with great importance where Alicent is like, "This will put a stop to the war," when that's an insane thing to say. I wish the writers committed to Rhaenyra being morally corrupted by revenge this season, instead of hard pivoting her into not wanting to go to war. Then she wouldn't be so hesitant to actually attack King's Landing, since she spends 4 dialogue scenes talking about it in the finale. It creates a massive redundancy and makes the narrative feel like it's spinning in circles, along with Rhaenyra having a much less interesting arc this season. I don't feel like I need to explain again all the detailed writing flaws within the final confrontation, and even past this, the writers blue ball us with Rhaena not taming Sheepstealer, and then dragging that shit out, and we get 3 scenes of Tywin hanging out with the Triarchy, while we get Aemon destroying Strypoint off screen. The flaws in this episode feel so insulting, and I put this episode much lower if it wasn't for the heavy lifting being done by those great scenes. Season 1, Episode 6. The Princess and the Queen. I actually had this episode on the bottom of my list for the last ranking video, and The Princess and the Queen has grown on me quite a bit. I don't think the episode is as egregiously poorly written as everything before this. I still have my gripes like the jarring nature of the big time jump and the unresolved baggage that it skipped over, and the whole fact that this is essentially a second pilot. So this means that we're in a position narratively where we have to reintroduce a lot of characters and dynamics. This inherently cuts into the time of establishing a primary conflict that hooks the viewer that other episodes didn't have to worry about. Also, since we're skipping over so much development, we end up not caring about Rhaenyra and Daemon's new relationships, which both coincidentally end with tragic deaths this episode that barely have any impact on the viewer because they weren't built up. This really highlights how desperately we needed an additional episode between 5 and 6, and who cares if the season is 11 episodes long? Hell, just give me George R. R. Martin doing jumping jacks for the finale, and the fandom would give the season a 10 out of 10.
Really good.
Season 1, Episode 1, The Heirs of the Dragon. This is a pretty solid pilot. It does a good job at establishing and setting up the relationships of every main character. Just in comparison to Game of Thrones, you can really see how much better the pilot is for that show because it has a significantly more captivating hook for the story. While in House of the Dragon, the actual hook or meat of the story is the Greens versus the Blacks narrative, and that doesn't start until halfway through the season. So the first episode, while I personally like it, and probably most fans of Game of Thrones, I think can have a hard time engaging new viewers because it doesn't really have an engrossing conflict to dive into initially. We essentially open with birthing and succession drama, which is a bit divisive for what people would determine as an interesting plot. But for setting up the characters in context of the Green versus Black drama, this is undeniably good. Also, the main set piece, the jousting tournament, runs a bit too long and the action is too Miguel Sapochnik-y. Although, the stunt that Daemon does while falling off his horse is insane. There are also a few standout scenes like Viserys choosing to kill Aemma for a potential son, which is horrifying, Viserys being forced to choose a successor right after the funeral, and Viserys disowning Daemon. So I feel like this has just enough great scenes to land this episode at about the halfway point on my ranking. Season 2, Episode 6, Small Folk. This is the lowest rated episode on IMDb, and I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as the ratings imply. It's obviously getting demolished by people upset about the Rhaenyra and Mysaria kiss, but that's honestly a minor moment in the overall episode. And while I think the moment could have been handled better and probably shouldn't have been improvised, it's not a massive negative that Rhaenyra is bisexual. Besides that, Aemond's leading the small council is riveting, Daemon and Simon Strong's romance is flourishing, Darkland trying to tame Seasmoke had some incredible execution, Gawain and Alicent had some lovely and heartwarming dialogue, and we got a little pop of action with the small folk riot. I do wish the scene was longer since we've been building up to this point throughout the season, and it only surmounts to Alicent and Helena running back to their carriage in under a minute. I think it would have been much better if they got forced into the side streets and were chased by the small folk in a more claustrophobic environment. Kind of akin to World War Z, but with a bunch of hungry, poor people. Eat the rich, baby. But yeah, the scene leaves a bit to be desired, and I think it's still good. It could just be better. Then the rest of the episode has some critical build-up, so I honestly don't know what all the fuss is about in terms of hating this. The only other critique is that they probably could have cut one of the Viserys dreams to make the episode a bit tighter, but it's not that big of a deal to me. Season 1, Episode 2, The Rogue Prince. This episode is very similar to the pilot in that it's still a lot of succession drama and Corlys is still complaining about the stepstones, but I think the main set piece this time around is much more engaging. Daemon being a loose cannon and stealing a dragon egg, and the narrative kind of propping him up as an antagonist, instills conflict into the beginning of the season that's more intriguing. On rewatch though, you understand Daemon much more, and as a result, the scene feels rather toothless, but the presentation is still outstanding. The ambiance, pace, soundtrack, cinematography, and directing is immaculate, and creates a hyper-tense environment for this scene. And this also acts as the first time for Rhaenyra to kind of prove herself, and we also hear her iconic theme for the first time as well. Then I think the dialogue scenes for this episode are a bit stronger in comparison to the pilot. Season 2, Episode 1, A Son for a Son. Like your usual first episode to any season, A Son for a Son has to reestablish a lot, and that in turn doesn't allow for many great scenes to occur. The main highlight for this episode though is obviously Blood and Cheese, and how you view this episode's quality/placement is purely dependent on how much you like that scene. For me, I thought it was pretty good, and I do admit it could have been better given that a third of the episode is basically Blood and Cheese. In hindsight though, after the season's end, it feels weird that this event completely dissipates in the narrative, which isn't an exaggeration. Alicent forgets about this in her final scene, and Helena is apparently on Team Black, despite Daemon ordering her child to be killed, along with Helena not really being explored as a character, and the ramifications and mental damage done by that ending are dampened because of that. So all of this partially undercuts the weight of Blood and Cheese. However, looking at the scene from an isolated perspective, it's still good. It's extremely tense with great buildup and atmosphere, and the actual act is a bolt of adrenaline that explodes the ending of the episode. Season 1, Episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. Similar to The Princess and the Queen, King of the Narrow Sea has also climbed substantially on my list. I went into my rewatch like, I don't want to sit through Rhaenyra's sexual escapade again. However, the last half of the episode is a marathon of great dialogue scenes with so much juicy material. Like Otto having to break the news to Viserys about what Rhaenyra did, which is charged with so much subtle nuances, as Otto has to consider every single word carefully. Rhaenyra swears on her mother's grave and lies to Alicent, which is so gutting, basically acting as the first time the audience has a reason to dislike her character. Daemon gets eviscerated by Viserys, and Daemon trying to negotiate in this position is hilarious. Viserys and Rhaenyra's confrontation is tense and explosive, and Otto's dismissal has an incredible display of acting.
You're crazy.
The episode also ends on a brilliant point with more subtlety that has darker implications. The last half of the episode is wholly electric, and I don't mind the first half essentially setting all of this up. And honestly, the first half is still solid, and I found Rhaenyra's adventure to be interesting, given she's never done this, and her manipulating Cole adds a dash of moral complexity to Rhaenyra's character. Given that, she's allowing her sexual lust to corrupt the honor of her personal Kingsguard. So it may be a happy and warm moment, but there's a deeper tragic layer under the surface. Season 2, Episode 7, The Red Sowing. This episode is greatly propelled by the two standout scenes of Oscar Tully's epic speech at Harrenhal and the Targaryen bastard all-you-can-eat buffet. The latter is an incredible point of action with a riveting 3-minute-long oneer. This turns what would otherwise be a good action scene into being insane on a technical standpoint. This presentation hooks you into Hugh's perspective and very cleverly shows the chaos unfolding in an unbroken manner. I've seen people say that Rhaenyra was dumb for doing this, but this is exactly what I want the writers to lean into. Turn her moral internal state into something that's more complex. If anything, this was the correct decision because sending everyone in one by one probably wouldn't have worked and could have scared everyone else away. Then for Oscar Tully's scene, this is simply a perfect display of writing from balancing multiple complicated relationships, having twists, and greatly changing the dynamics between different characters. Intellect oozes from this scene, and Oscar Tully clocking that he has to stomp on Daemon to earn the respect from everyone else was clever, and Daemon also allowing that was equally brilliant. The rest of the episode is your stereotypical build-up, which is fine, outside of the good dialogue scene between Jace and Rhaenyra, where Jace heavily disapproves of giving Targaryen bastards dragons. The only two issues I can pin on this episode are Alan's encounter with Corlys being really dry, and it's pretty silly that no one notices that Rhaena runs away or sends a search party to go after her.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
Season 1, Episode 3, Second of His Name. Outside of the ending battle, I really adore how this episode takes place in one setting. It kind of forces every character to confront each other in this condensed hot pot, and the episode also has a great progression because of this. It actually feels like each character goes through great change, and we as a viewer go on a journey as well. Like Viserys becoming more and more drunk, which allows him to open up and spill all of his misfortunes and grievances. Then for Rhaenyra, she's fed up with this external pressure of needing to find a romantic match, and just runs away to decompress and finally escape all this royalty politicking bullshit. Which, speaking of that, probably one of the best comedic moments is this.
Who do you have in mind?
Prince Aegon. The boy just turned 2 on her. Yes.
But yeah, this whole 40-minute chunk of the episode I found to have some enrapturing character development, and it also ends on such a sweet symbolic moment. The only weird point in the writing that I picked up on rewatch is that it's odd how Rhaenyra is still mad at Alicent for marrying her father after 3 years. That seems kind of ridiculous, and you think they'd resolve that much earlier. Then the battle for the Stepstones is a fun point to end the episode on, along with it giving us arguably one of the most iconic gifts in the show of Daemon reading the letter from Viserys. In regards to this moment, I love how the writers leave the internal headspace of Daemon to be interpreted by the viewer. It makes his character more intriguing, and when he explodes into his adrenaline-fueling sprint, it's an all-or-nothing play for him to prove himself, which glues you to his character. Overall, as an action scene, I think it's good, just when the actual battle starts, it feels like it ends too quickly, which is a little underwhelming. Season 1, Episode 7, Driftmark. Similar to the last episode, I think House of the Dragon Season 1 is at its best when all these characters are forced into a confined space for a long duration. It leads to scenes with a deep complexity as there are so many complicated dynamics between characters that we as a viewer are constantly pinging around from. And this all boils over into the first major point of climax in the eye for an eye scene. Alicent pulling the knife and Rhaenyra stopping her is an iconic plot point, and even the aftermath has some gutting dialogue.
Everyone knows. Just look at them.
I will say that the main thing that has annoyed me even more on rewatch is the terrible day for night lighting. At first in the funeral, it's passable, but the fact that it completely obscures Rhaenyra and Daemon's dialogue scene is tragic. We can barely read their facial expressions, and it completely subdues the quality of the scene since we can't see their acting. Other than this unfortunate flaw, Aemon taming Vhagar is awe-inspiring and luckily has much better lighting. Rhaenys has an incredible dialogue scene with Corlys that includes some iconic lines, and Driftmark basically has an additional surprise ending of Rhaenyra faking Laenor's death. Which, at the time, this was a surprising and cool plot point, but it's kind of weird narratively to imply that this character dies off screen, since Seasmoke becomes a free agent. It kind of makes you think if it would have been better to just kill his character, and make Rhaenyra more corrupted internally. Along with it being inconsistent mechanic-wise, where Seasmoke doesn't have the ability to track him down, like, say, Drogon. Season 1, Episode 10, The Black Queen. Hey, this is what a finale should be. An ending that shatters the status quo of the show and launches the narrative into an exciting direction, having an insane plot point that reverberates throughout the entire story, big points of payoff that have been building throughout the season, and despite all of this, setting up certain elements for Season 2. I'd probably put this episode higher, and really the only thing negative I can say, which is minor, is that there are just a ton of Black Council scenes, which is warranted. But at least Daemon and Corlys are around to actually make these scenes more interesting, unlike in Season 2. Then in the beginning there's another birth scene, which by this point we've already had a lot, but at least it's edited in a great way where they intercut Rhaenyra's birth with Daemon trying to be proactive in the war, essentially highlighting his priorities and alludes to a point of contention for their characters in the next season. Then obviously the main standout scene is Vhagar killing Lucerys. I'd say this is probably the second best scene in the show. It's simultaneously frightening and exhilarating, it's extremely well shot with creative angles, and it's flat out just an incredible chase scene but done with dragons. Even before this, I love the pace and slow build to this chase that gives you this haunting feeling of dread that something terrible is about to happen. But yeah, it's too bad that Season 2 doesn't really carry this narrative momentum established by the Black Queen. Season 2, Episode 4, The Red Dragon and the Gold. Before diving into the battle, which is what everyone loves about this episode, there's actually a nice handful of good scenes before it, like Daemon confronting a young Rhaenyra and his blunt dialogue with Oscar Tully. Aemon shuts Aegon down in Valyrian. Aegon is also crushed again by his own mother, and Alicent and Larys surprisingly have their only dialogue scene this season. So this episode's scenes range from decent to good, with a massive exclamation point at the end that encompasses the last 15 minutes. The battle has a magnificent display of action as the scale of the scene is huge, the dragon VFX is at its best ever, and it's incredible to see actual dragon fighting chaotic goodness and general tactics, and Ramin Djawadi is arguably at his best with a sweeping score that's simultaneously epic and tragic. I do have my gripes with this battle, like the insane coincidence of Aegon arriving when Aemon gets summoned, Vhagar's teleportation magician trick, and Rhaenys' motivation being a little confounding. Also, on further retrospection, I think it's a little absurd that Aemon flat out doesn't tell the small council that he plans to ambush Meleys with Vhagar. I don't see why he needs to withhold this information, especially since he lays out the plan to attack Rook's Rest. But in general, these flaws aren't as critical as, say, like the major writing conundrums within the Battle of the Bastards. So Rook's Rest quality isn't tarnished enough for me to drop it down in my ranking. Season 2, Episode 2, Rhaenyra the Cruel. I feel like most people, just off of the fact that episode 4 had a battle, would put that as their favorite, but I think episode 2 is a bit stronger. Primarily because the first half of this episode is an onslaught of outstanding scenes. From Aegon going batshit crazy, everyone's reaction to the death of Jaehaerys was engrossing and riveting, the funeral ride was shot in such a beautiful way and had great directing, Kristen has such a devilishly petty scene with Eric that makes you despise him, and my favorite scene of the season is Rhaenyra and Daemon's explosive confrontation. Obviously, the acting and dialogue here is amazing, but another thing I want to point out that's equally brilliant is the blocking. This scene is so dynamic and fluid, and the way the actors are positioned is so thought out and perfectly punctuates given character beats. Like Daemon being seated and then exploding out of his seat when he can't contain his anger anymore. Truly incredible directing and acting. Then, this is only the first half of the episode because we also have Otto's dismissal, which I feel like deserves an Emmy nomination on its own, and Eric Bull. Now, I'm not crazy about Eric Bull, given that I'm not attached to their characters, but the scene was still undeniably extremely well done. The only minor critiques I can make towards this episode is that there's a bit of a lull at the halfway point, although it's not a major deal due to the overall episode being an hour and 8 minutes, and Rhaenyra suddenly pivots into being nice and peaceful, but I feel like that's more of an issue for the overall season for Rhaenyra's arc. Season 1, Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides. I honestly thought this might get lowered, but I'm sorry, that dinner with Viserys still absolutely rockets a punch into your soul. I think it especially has such a profound impact because this is truly the only heartwarming moment in the entire show. The Dance of Dragons is laced with tragedies, and this is the one shining moment of wholesomeness that's also just done with such incredible execution, like with the overwhelming happy music, detailed background acting, and even the build up to this scene where Viserys has a really down-to-earth moment and reveals his face. It's pure bliss, and it's still my favorite scene in the show. Then, besides this, the rest of the episode is also stacked. We get a cool in-depth look at Dragonstone, Rhaenyra seeing Viserys in his current state was somber and tragic, Alicent dealing with Diana is gutting given what we learn about Aegon, while this also highlights her humanity. On rewatch, there's actually some cool foreshadowing for Eric Bull, Rhaenys and Rhaenyra's dialogue scene has so much tension, and the entire throne room scene is amazing. Like, it was genuinely surprising to see Viserys be able to get back to the throne, and it's such an uplifting and powerful moment. Along with Daemon having a final sweet moment with his brother, and also decimating Vaemond. All around, The Lord of the Tides is easily the strongest episode to me, and definitely still holds up. Thank you for watching, and let me know what your rankings would be in the comments. Also, my Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description. Thank you incredibly to my top patron, Logan Farmer.